The Gospel of John does not describe Jesus as a miracle worker. Instead, it characterizes him as a worker of signs. Most theologians believe there are 7 signs, or 8, or 9, depending on which theologian you listen to. But these include turning water into wine, the healing miracles, and walking on water. Each one points to a larger truth about the divine nature of Jesus. In today's gospel, Jesus works a sign by healing a man who was born blind. The Pharisees criticize him, saying, if Jesus really was from God, he would know enough that the law prohibits such works of healing on the Sabbath. By questioning the legality of what Jesus does, the Pharisees once again miss the obvious point. They focus on the action instead of on the larger truth that the action reveals. The man's physical issues are a small part of the whole story, a much bigger picture. And this man's relationship with Jesus teaches us about our own relationship with Jesus. In ancient times, people often assumed that suffering was the result of sinfulness. And the disciples are no different. They ask Jesus, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, because he was born blind? We still hear this assumption in conversation today. How many times have you heard stories or news reports about terrific family dysfunction or gun violence or bullying or cancer or birth defects or natural disasters, and someone says, what did we do to deserve this? Or, is God punishing us? And suddenly we realize that what the disciples are asking about in this gospel is all too familiar with us. Jesus' answer to the disciples, and for us, for that matter, is an unwavering, neither this man nor his parents have sinned. Jesus reminds me of Rabbi Harold Kushner's axiom, sometimes bad things happen to good people. In describing the blind man, Jesus goes beyond Rabbi Kushner and says he was born blind so that God's works might be revealed in him. And in this explanation, we are reminded of very good news. Even in the midst of things we cannot change or understand, God remains at work. And to prove this point, Jesus works this sign. He gives the blind man sight and something even better. The man is unable to put into words what happens to him or even why it happens to him, but he knows Jesus' voice. And when Jesus says, go wash, he does it. He hears Jesus' voice and follows the voice. And then, at long last, his sight is restored. He sees Jesus and he cries out, Lord, I believe. And this man who was once blind, physically blind and spiritually blind, falls down and worships Jesus' feet. Who among us has not suffered from spiritual blindness in one form or another, at some time or another? Just as Nicodemus was spiritually blind and the woman at the well was spiritually blind, this man suffers spiritual blindness, and so do all of us. When we put ourselves before others, we are blind. When we hold grudges and refuse to forgive, we are blind. When we say we are lucky rather than blessed, we are blind. When we do what's easy instead of what's right, we are blind. And spiritual blindness affects communities as well. Economic, social, and political institutions often turn a blind eye to the poor, to the outcast, to those who are hungry, to those who live on the margins of society in every part of the world. How can we even consider not funding the SNAP program? Some of you may not know these statistics, but of the total amount of food given to food cupboards to pass out to those people who are in need, churches supply, guess what the percentage is? 50, 75? This church has donated a lot of food, but churches, faith communities donate less than 10%. That means 90% of the food in the food pantries is given by government aid. If we stop this, do you think we can make up 90% more food donations to the food cupboard? I don't think so. Churches are shrinking. We're much smaller than we used to be. And we can't make up that kind of food problem. It's going to leave many, many people hungry. That is institutional blindness. Think of the suffering among each of us: depression, anxiety, abuse, neglect, broken relationships, debilitating illnesses, hunger, unemployment, and I know you can add at least 10 others from your experience. And we suffer as communities too. Natural disasters, tornadoes, and extreme weather. There's no hiding from suffering. We may attempt to lull ourselves into complacency, into believing that faith brings an end to all suffering and blindness and alleviates all fear and pain. That once we start going to church or become a disciple or read the Bible, we will live happily ever after. Not going to happen in my experience. The cold, hard truth remains that suffering is and always will be a part of life. Even after the blind man receives his sight, he's faced with rejection by his family and friends. Suffering and grief are excruciatingly painful. It's horrifying to see the faces of victims or hear the cry of their families on a news report dealing some new horrific experience. Deep in our hearts, each of us knows that suffering is an inescapable part of being human. But the life-giving truth of the gospel is that our suffering and grief will not have the last word. When our souls and our bodies desperately cry out for relief, we can hear the faint, clear voice of the risen Christ calling to us, reminding each one of us that through the cross, suffering and death are swallowed up in victory. The final word does not lie in suffering, in blindness, or death, but instead in life, in peace, and in light. Anyone who thinks he or she knows all the answers, who does not recognize that we all suffer from blindness, is a person who is truly spiritually blind, beyond our help, because only those who acknowledge their weakness can become strong. Only those who acknowledge their blindness can learn to see. Only those who acknowledge they are sinners can ask for forgiveness. Anyone conscious of his or her own blindness who wants to see better and know more is a person whose eyes may be opened and whose heart may be led more deeply into the way of truth and life. In the gospel message today, we hear the simple words, go, wash. When we listen to these words and we feel the refreshing water of life wash over us, our eyes, and most importantly, our hearts are opened to see the living God, Jesus Christ, standing before us. And the chains of suffering and death lie broken at his feet. Now, just for a moment, I want you to pick up your leaflet and I want you to turn to Psalm 23. And we're going to read this in unison. You might want to cut this out and put it on your refrigerator with your other mementos, or put it on your bedside and read it before you go to sleep. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. He leads me beside the still waters and restores my soul. This is living water we're talking about. And once again, my voice cries out, Lord, I believe. And I leave you with one simple question. Do you? Thanks be to God.